There's Talk TV, Trans Row. We've got Felix F. Fern, Triple F.
Good morning, how are you? Christo
Oh, I thought that was sped up. It's not. Okay.
here on Talk TV, one of the most contentious and divisive stories of the last 24 hours, and a story you've actually asked us to return to. So we are this morning is what is being described as a toxic row over Scotland's gender recognition bill.
Yeah, I remember this pretty well. I used to be very pro self-ID. I think nowadays I'm a lot less so, because I don't think it's something that people should just be ascribing to themselves and then that's it.
A landmark ruling making it easier for transgender people to change their recorded gender, meaning that the process is no longer requiring a medical diagnosis. And not only that, it's now open to those who are 16 and 17.
Yeah, that Hamza Yusuf, was it his name was, that was in Mara around the time. Wait, was it even Hamza Yusuf? It might have been Nicola Sturgeon at that point. The whole thing was crazy. The SNP lost insane amounts of support. They've got a new guy in now. I don't know what he's really like, but I'm kind of imagining there's going to be a change of power there as well as in England, because people seem pretty fucked off with the SNP.
Years of age. Well, Felix Fern is the co-founder of the grassroots activism team Trans Activism UK.
Don't you know what I mean? Like, you hear something like that, you expect someone quite professional, which is totally what we're getting. Like, you know, no, there's been no other watching of this person's things. We are completely tabula rasa. This person could be the most based person I've ever heard in my life.
And joins me now. Morning to you, Felix.
There you go. How could you get more professional looking?
Good morning, Christo.
Thanks for taking the time to talk to us here on Talk TV.
I'm like baffled by the beard. Is it like between chins? Oh, I'm being fat phobic. I'm sorry. I'm going to stop doing that now. Let's just carry on.
Why do you think it needed to be made easier? Surely the diagnosis of gender dysphoria, meaning that you don't want to live within the same gender of the sex you were assigned at birth, making you either trans or gender fluid or whatever it is you may be, surely that is a medical diagnosis, and there should be at least a part of that that is medicalised.
Well, there's more to it than just a medical diagnosis. Reforming the process doesn't just remove diagnosis. It kind of changes the procedure in general to make it easier for both trans people and the government. When it comes to a medical diagnosis, I
guess that's true, actually. The government has less to do. The people can take it on themselves. It's whether they should be, because, you know, at a certain point, we can call ourselves anything. What does that say about, you know, access to spaces that perhaps men shouldn't be in, or perhaps even women shouldn't be in, you know?
kind of a privilege in a way. For a lot of trans people, it can take years to get any kind of medical notice, let alone care, by which
That is true as well.
point the medical service is already asking you, please have evidence of this, please show that you are living in your correct gender and whatnot. And for a lot of people, that's quite difficult if you can't have the paperwork to back it up. So it makes
I don't see how it's difficult, because what they mean by that is generally changing your name, being known as your name, usually making some effort to cross-dress, to pass, whatever. I think we'll see where he's going here, but I don't think I agree so far with this specific bit.
makes sense to kind of bring those procedures together. And for some people, they don't necessarily want to medically transition. To be trans, you don't have to have hormones or surgery.
Yeah, I disagree hardcore with that. I think if you're trans, there should be some transition there. I think if you want to say that you can be non-binary and just identify as a thing and not really take any steps to actually do anything to change yourself, then that's fine. But why does it have to be trans? Why is that trans? How are you not just cis, but you call yourself something else at that point? Do you know what I'm saying?
You just need to be able to live who you are honestly.
But the
And how could you possibly know when someone's living who they are honestly? I don't believe what most people say about anything, much less their identity. Like, I don't know. It feels childish. It feels, we just let people be whatever they want to be. It's like, yeah, but should we be encouraging like delusional thinking? Should someone be calling themselves a woman and like getting a certificate that says they're a woman and then just staying biologically male, not changing anything whatsoever about themselves?
The issue with that, and I'm sure you appreciate this, is that, and I'll be crude about it, you could end up in a situation where someone who has declared their gender identity, which may well be different to their body type, essentially you may well have someone with male genitalia who has received a gender recognition certificate declaring that they are female, able to then use female changing rooms, female hospital wards.
I think changing rooms is actually a much better one than toilets, because changing rooms are generally more open. So there is more of a risk of someone going in there and behaving inappropriately. Like we had some woman that was like shaving her legs or something, or shaving her face, like in the women's changing room, like just in front of people. Like stuff like that is a bit weird. Like maybe just do some things at home,
And those sorts of spaces. Why should that be easier?
He's not gonna have a problem with anyone accessing any space, because it's more about identity, is my guess.
Do you appreciate women who use those spaces, biological women, having concerns about that?
Honestly, not really.
Not really, no. Well, let's see why. We're open-minded, remember, we're not Alec Gunter.
If the person is trans and they identify as female, their body should be irrelevant.
I cannot agree with that at all. You can't just be a man and say that you're a woman and then your body doesn't matter because you're a woman. Like, that's just nonsensical on the face of it. Like, even when you do change your body, there's only so much you can change. Like, I don't have a fully working, like, uterus, etc. I never will. Like, my voice it's not higher now because I'm trans. I have certain features about me that are always going to be that way. And I think you're alienating a lot of women right off the bat by saying that they should just be okay with it, because, women don't necessarily want their own identities to be erased, which it feels almost like erasure sometimes.
No one is going around and flashing their genitals to people.
No one is doing this. I mean, we can probably find examples if you're going to say no one is doing this.
So that shouldn't be a problem.
It shouldn't be a problem because no one is doing this. No, come on.
Someone is doing it in a way to lie about their identity, the legislation has that as fraud. There are things in place to tackle that.
But how do you tell who's lying when you insist that we believe everyone's identities all the time? He hasn't done it personally, but I have a feeling that's how he thinks. I mean, he said that their bodies are irrelevant to it because that's how they identify. How do you know when someone genuinely identifies? See, to me, if I see someone that's been identifying as something like a man for years and years, but they've never changed anything about themselves, they don't do anything particularly masculine with their appearance, they don't do anything particularly masculine in general, like, how do I know they're telling the truth? When someone's transition just consists of very, disposable things, like things that they can change easily, like growing your hair out a bit and wearing like nail polish. Like, that's very easy things. That doesn't suggest a huge amount of commitment. But again, you can't really comment on stuff like that because these people are like, well, how do you know? How do you know? Well, how do you know? How are you so happy to put so much faith in these people? People lie about things for all sorts of reasons, and people transition for all sorts of reasons, not just gender dysphoria. Like, people do it because it's trendy. I'm sorry, it's just how it is. Some people do. There are plenty of social situations you can find yourself in where you would gain a whole bunch of clout for transitioning, and where you would be treated much better as a trans person than as a cis person. So we have to bear that in mind. Should those identities, should people that transition to be like their friends, should they be able to self-identify and just access wherever they want?
So trans women are not a threat in female spaces.
Well, anyone can be a threat in female spaces. They're not more likely to be a threat from what statistics I know, which suggests that the problem isn't really with the fact that they're trans people. It's just that some people are shit in general. Let's keep going.
But don't you? I don't believe that trans people are the threat. By the way, what I think is a fair concern is that firstly, people who have ill intent will use the rights won by trans people to enter those safe.
So I don't entirely agree with this point either, because it's very easy when it comes to stuff like toilets to say, well, there isn't anyone keeping guard of toilets. You know, you go to work and there's like a men's toilet and a women's toilet. You just walk into whichever one you want, and the only people that are going to stop you are the people in there, generally. So I don't know how much of a good argument this is, but it's certainly possible. It certainly could potentially make it easier for people to access spaces inappropriately. What have I done? Oh my God. Where were we? Hit my life. Here we go.
And for a lot of people, that's quite difficult if you can't have the
about it, certificate declaring that they are rooms, female hospital wards, and those sorts of spaces. Why should that be easier and do?
Yeah, I think how I'm trying to think about it, like, you have to accept that there's always going to be a potential for an abuse. And if you're making it that much easier, you're potentially giving people a way to get away with like certain kinds of acts if they can do something and it can't be proven that they did it. And they can produce a piece of paper to say, actually, no, I was meant to be in here the whole time. There is potential for it. And I think as it stands right now, people are not going to go through all the hassle of transitioning just to be able to get into a woman's toilet or something. Like, they're just going to go in because the rules obviously don't matter to them that much if they're planning on doing something much worse anyway. But I don't think you can ignore that self-ID would perhaps promote some of these people to do it because it's just a lot easier now. So it's not a very strong point against self-ID, but I feel like this person isn't going to acknowledge that there could be a potential for abuse. Or if they do, they'll just minimize it. But let's see.
Do you appreciate women who use those spaces, biological women, having concerns about that?
Honestly, not really. If the person is trans and they identify as female, their body should be irrelevant.
Trans people are the threat.
Yeah, so he's not answering the question, really. Like, he's just saying, well, it's identity. They just trust that people are being honest, I guess. I don't know. I don't trust people. That's the problem. And maybe you shouldn't trust people either. And this person doesn't trust plenty of people. I've seen what they're like on Twitter. I've seen what they talk about. I've seen the ways in which they talk about people they don't agree with. So it's a funny one. Like, do you really think that none of these rightoids that you hate so much are going to be like fucking around with the self-ID system to show how faulty it might be, you know?
By the way, what I think is a fair concern is that firstly, people who have ill intent will use the rights won by trans people to enter those safe spaces. It's all well and good having rules around fraud, but if it is normalised that someone who presents as male is in a female safe space, well, that is going to leave the door open for someone who is not trans but has ill intent to be in those spaces. But secondly, it's about a perception of safety. For instance, you know, I've spoken to a lot of women who just fear the idea of male genitalia, whomever it may be attached to and however that person may identify.
Yeah, you definitely have to consider people who have like those kind of traumas, for definite. And I wonder if this person here will even kind of speak to that at all. Because the last question he asked, he didn't really answer, you know?
Being in a space where they are vulnerable and want to feel safe. You must surely get that.
And by the way, when these people say things like trans rights don't take away from women's rights, this is potentially a right that to be fully pro-trans, you kind of are taking away from them, right?
Well, there are several countries that have similar legislation and work on a self-identification basis, and they have shown that that threat simply doesn't exist. There has not been some sudden spike.
What countries? We need evidence of this, please. I'm begging you, just for once, just this once. I know you don't do this kind of thing. I know there's no links to studies in this where he could have easily put a few that he's talking about. But let's see.
Like in men rushing into women's changing rooms pretending to be women. This is
There's no spike in men rushing into changing rooms pretending to be women. Like the way they word this kind of stuff. Like maybe I shouldn't get so hyper autistic about this, but it really bothers me. Like, let's just keep watching.
This is a fear that has been created not to protect women. Sorry, excuse me.
Fear that's been created.
But to attack trans people.
To attack trans people. So it's a conspiracy theory. Okay, great. He's not gonna even attempt to answer this. He's not gonna speak for the kind of people that have trauma around seeing someone's dick because something terrible happened to them. They got sexually assaulted, and in an actual way, not in a George Not Found kind of way. I don't know.
People. It's a fear mongering that doesn't actually exist. It's a bogeyman idea. It's similar to how
I disagree. I really respect.
Yeah, he won't even say the countries. He's just saying it's a conspiracy theory. It's a bogeyman. What are we supposed to do with this exactly? Like, if you're not gonna engage with the question, why are you here?
Fully disagree. And by the way, let me just say, I really want a solution to this that respects the rights of trans people.
There is a solution. If you want to use the women's bathroom, make an effort. Don't be weird. If you've got a dick, keep it to yourself. Don't get it out when you're not in an enclosed space by yourself. It's really simple. Like, if you're gonna be someone who looks nothing like a woman, but because of your identity, you insist on using the women's anyway, you're probably going to get shit for that. And you're probably going to get misgendered. And you're probably going to be told by at least one person to get out. Someone might think that you're up to no good, whether you are or not. That's just how it is. Like, life is unfair. Maybe life is transphobic in some ways, but that's just how it is. We're the ones that are changing and insisting on taking on a new role. So I think some effort does need to be made on our side instead of just saying, well, I identify as this now, so you've got to let me. Like, that's mad to me.
I genuinely do. But I spoke to a caller, for instance, yesterday on my programme. I referenced this earlier. And she was talking about how her daughter went to university and was always quite shy about her body and was showering in... I wish we had a clip of it, actually. Started showering...
I wish we had a clip of it.
In the communal halls of residence with other women and in changing rooms and stuff, and was amazed by how actually fine she felt doing that, until the day a person with a penis came in who was trans, so therefore, again, didn't pose...
Yeah, exactly. Speak to this particular example. Like, understand the trauma that some people have. Like, this speaks to a lack of empathy for me. And I guess maybe he'll come around a bit more. Maybe he'll convince me that that's not the case. But that's the impression I'm getting.
The threat was in no way acting inappropriately, but immediately she said, I felt vulnerable. I now don't want to get changed in that space. And she's 19. She's like, I love trans people. I don't want to have any issue with trans people, but I do not want to be naked in a place where there is a penis. And I know I'm being really crude this time of the morning, and apologies for anyone listening.
Why do we have
you
communal
get that?
changing facilities? That we just shouldn't have communal changing facilities. It really is that easy. A lot of the
We just shouldn't have this then. Oh, man, I don't know. Just install cubicles everywhere. Everywhere, just fork out for that shit, I guess. Or just split them based on sex. And if you're going to go into a different changing room, you should probably look the way you should look. You should probably not show your penis off. Yeah, I don't know. He's not interested in the fact that people actually have genuine feelings and genuine traumas on this shit. To me, it speaks of someone who their ideology is their empathy. They think that that's what makes them a good person, when ideology does not make you a good person.
The time when people talk about this issue, they don't even mention changing spaces. They'll often mention toilets. That's one that comes up a lot. Well, in toilets, you certainly shouldn't be.
So he's changed the subject again. Like, well, it shouldn't be communal things. Anyway, here's my feelings on, do you give a shit about the fact that women do feel this way? Do you give the slightest shit about that?
Seeing anyone else's genitals, and I don't see why that should be the case in showers or changing spaces either. My sister is a cisgender woman, and she absolutely hates them. They make her incredibly uncomfortable.
That's not practical. When you think of a gym changing room, how can you possibly have...
practical.
How is it practical? What make gyms and schools and all that shit shell out for shit tons of cubicles? Like, really?
It's a change that people should have. Women
so who's paying for it then?
Have the right to be able to change and shower in privacy.
So there should be separate showers and changing rooms for everyone. Like, I don't know, every changing room I've been in, this just is not how it works, and I can't see it changing. Why should it change, moreover, for at best 1% of the population, most of whom, we're talking about changing rooms, like they're going to be at gyms and stuff. Trans people do not participate in sports at very large rates, which is a fair argument against like trans people coming in to dominate sports, but that's not my argument. So Jesus Christ, I've got 2 more videos. Jesus.
It's not about penises, it's about privacy. As I said,
he listed an example of specific trauma that you clearly don't give a shit about because you just gloss over it every time and make a face like you're hearing what he's saying, but then you're clearly not.
Hey, my sister is a cis woman, and she absolutely hates those. They make her very uncomfortable. Not because she's worried about seeing a penis. She doesn't want to see other women. Whereas during the Reformation bill that went ahead yesterday, a cisgender woman flashed herself to Parliament and young children. So who is the person that...
That's weird too. I don't like that kind of crazy activism on any side, so...
It's far more dangerous. Is it trans people who generally don't go around doing that?
This is a weird... Trans people generally don't go around doing this, but one protester did, so should we be focusing on cis women? Like, come on! Jesus Christ, this is dire. This is absolutely dire.
Someone who, to make a point about trans people, flashed themselves.
And that's bad too. That doesn't mean... Like, you could find examples of trans people behaving inappropriately. You could watch a fucking video about Jessica Yaniv, for example. But it's easier to just be like, well, no one's doing it. You have to, like, literally slap these examples in these people's faces. It feels like the only way to get people to engage and to accept that something has happened is to provide irrefutable evidence that this thing happened. Otherwise, they can be just like, well, I don't really see anyone doing it myself. I've had this happen to me over and over. And it's at the point where, like, years and years ago, when I used to try and engage with, like, online trans communities and shit, it got to the point where I now wish that I'd screenshotted every interaction I had, because no one believes me when I talk about how absolutely dogshit these spaces are and how non-inclusive they are, despite what they claim, towards anyone that disagrees with, like, the herd mentality. So yeah, it's depressing. We are very selective on where we'll have faith with people, where if someone's got a complaint, if someone sees an issue, we won't really take them at their word. We'll find ways to bury that. But when it's someone saying that they identify as something, oh yeah, there's absolutely no way this person is lying. There's absolutely no way this person could be saying anything but the truth. And then I guess they're trans now, just like me, even though they're not doing anything about it. They don't have dysphoria. Nothing really matters to them that much. I don't get it. I don't understand. There seems to be this weird double standard in these kind of conversations with a lot of these people. I don't like it. I don't think anyone should be being an activist should be advocating in this way.
Your sister, well, I agree that's a contradiction, but your sister feeling self-conscious around other women is different to...
No, it's not. It's not.
I mean, it's possible. Maybe Felix's sister has specific trauma around female bodies. I mean, that's the other thing. We can't just say, well, I've got this example. Well, no, I've got this example that contradicts it. That doesn't work. There has to be a better way of doing this shit than this. And this guy's trying. I don't know how much I can hold him responsible for that, maybe, but let's keep going.
About her being self-conscious. It's about her having autonomy and being able to have privacy and dignity. That has nothing to do with other people or her being self-conscious. And all women...
Why is it? How come? Why is it that because of his example, because of Felix's example, they should change it to all cubicles, everyone just gets a cubicle, whatever. But his example doesn't change anything about why maybe people with penises just shouldn't be in women's changing rooms. Why does one get to win out over the other when one of them requires spending a whole bunch of money to completely change the changing room, how much time they're going to be closed for whilst renovations go on? Who knows about the loss of money on a full scale, as opposed to just having some rules about who can go where, because there might be people with specific like traumas around seeing someone's dick because they got raped or something. I don't understand. It just sounds like he picked a side, and he probably sees this person as having picked a side on the other side. It's hard to tell. Again, I'm reaching into his head. I appreciate that. But yeah.
Should have that entitlement.
But that's about a desire to be private because she doesn't want to remove her clothes. That's not about the tool.
Yeah, she doesn't want to be seen.
Let him speak. Jesus Christ.
By other people.
Maybe she should be talking to a therapist about this kind of thing. Have you ever suggested that? Have we ever suggested maybe someone else's issues are in fact their problem and not other people's? But no, instead it's because certain people have these issues. Well, I'm gonna advocate for changing loads of stuff that other people should spend money on because I say so. Like, is this realistic? I don't understand. I don't understand at all.
Everyone should have that right.
Yeah, but that's not about the tool of repression for women for centuries, the penis, being near to her. That's a different feeling of why she would want that change.
But if you had private spaces, that wouldn't be a...
But we're not having private spaces. No one's put them in the, year and a half since this was aired. Or, yeah, 23rd of December. Well, did he upload it the same day? It's hard to tell. It reminds me of the Alec Gunter thing, saying about artificial scarcity of trans healthcare, where it's just like, oh, well, then they should just build more things. Well, that's not necessarily going to happen. So then what? Should we then think about other solutions? Should we then think about whether some people need to consider getting help for the specific problems they have, like this person's sister, for example, who I mean no offense against. I don't know this person. I don't know his sister. Like, I don't understand. I'm trying so hard, and let's just keep going.
Threat.
Look, I actually agree. Private spaces is probably the least worst option going forward. My fear is that there are going to be many places in the world, or many places like changing rooms, like all those sorts of things. Like, I think about my gym, which has got sort of, sometimes you go in the changing room, there are 100 people in there. How on earth would you end up trying to negotiate making that private for everyone? I don't think it's a practical solution.
Think about it from the other point of view.
Yeah, that's the thing. There'd be more waiting for cubicles, but he's arguing for a position that doesn't even exist yet. And as of, like I said, a year and a half on from this video, it's not like things have changed any. So it's just a pointless conversation. I wonder how much he is in the same boat as that Frida person in terms of being more interested in disrupting these conversations than actually having anything to contribute to them. Trans Activism UK, I don't even know what kind of organization this is. He's always like hyped up as this. They have this many subscribers, but then this might not be their main platform. I know, this is dire. This is depressing, quite frankly. It's vaguely entertaining listening to someone spout utter gibberish in an effort to not actually deal with any of his points and just bat them straight back. But that's not debate. That's not arguing. Anyone can do that. Anyone can just contradict, well, I have an example that says this, and then try and force them to deal with your example instead of meaningfully dealing with the points from the other side, which we constantly write off as bigotry, which we constantly write off as fear-mongering, which we constantly write off as talking points instead of ever actually meaningfully addressing. And it continues to go nowhere. How is this activism? How is this good? I would love for someone to tell me how any of this shit that I've watched so far is good. I don't see any of it as good myself. And that's me looking at it with my own two eyes. It's not about me wondering who's got my best interests at heart because this person's saying the pro-trans thing and this person could be seen as saying the anti-trans thing. It's not about that. It's about the fucking truth, man. And this person doesn't seem like they care about the truth.
What about the trans people who have to go through that?
Exactly. What aboutism? What about? Why not address any of the shit he's saying first before asking questions? Like, has he answered really any questions? I mean, he's answered, you know, do you give much weight to this issue? Well, no. But it's just what about it, and it's just a reflection of the argument, it seems.
What about the trans men who may be using your gym and don't want to have to expose themselves to penises? It goes both ways. It goes both ways, but one way involves the place having to spend a load of money, close either part or all of the changing room for a while, whilst they carry out the renovations needed. And then there'll be a couple of cubicles. They'll probably have to keep most of it open space, you know, like... Why do we act like it's just so simple? I'll just change the complete layout of the place. Easy. Let's just change every changing room. Like, why not engage with how they are now and what's going on now instead of just doing whataboutism? Because you haven't meaningfully come back. Things like the example about women that don't want to see penises in there. What understanding has he shown for those people? What empathy is he showing for those people? It's just about, no, what about these people I care about? Shouldn't you care about everyone? You can feel vulnerable in a space like that. That doesn't change this act. This bill has nothing to do with separate spaces. To have a gender recognition certificate does not grant you access to any space. It's about things like birth and death certificates.
I understand
right
that.
Has always existed.
He's just monologuing at this point.
This bill changes none of it.
No, I think though that I think people feel though, women, and again, I'm not a woman. I'm just speaking on behalf.
Yeah, he's trying to put the arguments across. It's like we're still at point zero. He says something. This is what women are saying. He just goes off on some tangent and then he just asks the question again. This is so pointless. Like, yeah, if your only point here is to waste people's time, then great, I guess. But this is stupid.
Half of the people I've spoken to, people who aren't transphobic, I genuinely don't think they are. I think there are fringes on this debate.
He's nodding. I bet he calls these kinds of people transphobic on Twitter. I could be wrong, but I bet like the in-person energy and the Twitter energy is always different with these people. So what do you want to say? This is them thinking that they're moderating themselves, but he's just, fuck me, I don't know.
There undoubtedly are, but I think there are many, many moderate people in the middle who get misrepresented on this. So
yes, very much so. And we're almost at the end of the video, so let's see him not bother to acknowledge that, because so many like trans advocates, they love pushing the leftist shit. They love pushing the, cut a liberal and a fascist bleeds and shit like that. So they do kind of see everyone that's not like them as the same. And they do kind of see them all as transphobes, because it doesn't matter what mouth an argument is being put from to them. It doesn't matter if someone who's generally left-wing has a particular idea about trans people that a right-wing person has said before, or they can interpret as being right-wing talking points, because then they don't have to, because then they don't have to engage anymore, right? They don't have to have a conversation about that particular talking point. They just have to complain that that talking point is right-wing and thus doesn't matter for some reason.
I want to make that clear, but there are...
And he's not going to cop to any of this. It's like, just pick on whatever I can find to
people
divert.
Who fear that without the step of medicalisation and being in front of a GP for one step of it, that it opens up the floodgates to it all being easier and it all being sort of normalised to make it easier. And I just wonder whether there's any part of that you sort of understand.
I would understand it if it were a legitimate concern.
How would you know whether it's a legitimate concern or not? And who are you to decide whether it's a legitimate concern? This person has no empathy for the kind of people that actually have genuine fears, that have genuine trauma around like body parts and shit like that. They are not interested in these people whatsoever because they can spin it as being just scaremongering bullshit. That's what they're going to harp on as. That's what they're going to harp on with. I don't know. I don't know what I'm supposed to fucking say watching this, honestly. This is grim. Grim as fuck, quite frankly.
There are 2 points to that. One, many countries have self-identification and similar processes. They have not experienced these issues.
We'd have to look. Like, I mean, this person doesn't live in any of those countries. He lives in the UK, right? Like, can you really say that? Especially when you haven't listed any countries? What countries are we talking about?
And 2, the gender recognition certificate is not related to single-sex spaces.
It could be. What if someone is accessing them, doing stuff that's dodgy but not really criminal? Whenever anyone questions them, if they do get any kind of legal heat, they say, well, hey, I've got a gender certificate. This says that I should be in the women's toilets or whatever. Like, it could be, but he won't engage with that. So what's the point? Why are you here? What are you doing on this fucking show? This guy actually seems to want to have a conversation, and you're not willing to have that conversation. You just want to turn it around to your talking points. I wonder if he just writes down a bunch of shit that he wants to monologue, and then the whole debate for him is just finding ways to go onto those paths. I have a feeling, I don't know if I'd ever end up talking to someone like this. Like, I'm definitely interested in it because I have a lot of questions. I have a lot of concerns with the way that trans rights are being handled, including on these talk shows. I don't know if it would be worth it because from his track record, it's like, I'm just going to get dragged around the garden path in circles. I can raise as many points as I want. And I've had so many experiences like this. I can raise as many points as I want. I can meet the other person halfway as much as I want. But I can't expect that from anyone else. And it feels like, why do I make so much effort for other people to make none? So there's always going to be that concern if I end up talking to any of these people. That's kind of how it is. I hate this way of arguing. I don't think this is good for trans rights. I don't think, like, this isn't the worst I've seen of him. He's had worse debates than this. But this isn't good. Like, saying this isn't the worst Felix Fern debate is not saying much.
Or what spaces trans people use and have been using for decades without issue.
Have been using for decades without issue, but the population has risen over time, making it more likely for there to be an issue, because the more of a group there is, the more bad people within that group there's going to be.
Really appreciate you answering those questions. Felix Fern, co-founder of the grassroots activism team, Trans Activism UK, all here on Talk TV.
Well, that was fucking dire. What's next? So we've got Trisha Goddard. I know she had a show. It's actually really good. Yet again, you steered the correct conversation correctly. Yeah, gross.
Now, there's been a lot of stuff around transgender sports. The concept of transgender athletes competing in sport has been thrown into the spotlight in recent years. If you think about it, there's swimming, weightlifting, cycling, rugby union. They're just some of the sports that have been affected by the debate. Well, it comes news now that the World Boxing Council is set to establish a transgender category for 2023. The World Boxing Council plans to introduce a new category solely for transgender fighters in 2023. That's according to all reports. The sports will soon initiate a global call for trans athletes. So they're going to be actually asking trans athletes to come forward ahead of next year with the aim of setting up a fresh league or a tournament. WBC President Mauricio Suleiman believes that boxing needs to evolve for quote unquote safety and inclusion reasons. Now, they've been way ahead of everything before. Previously, they set standards on women's boxing rather than just let it evolve. And, because as you can imagine, there are rules, regulations, and what have you around it. They have set out to form something for transgender athletes. Now, is this what transgender athletes really want? Is it a step forward? Is it a step back? There are many, many points of view, of which
It just appeared on her hair there. I don't know what that was.
Next guest, Felix, who we've talked to before, co-founder of the grassroots activism team at Trans Activism UK. Felix joins me now. Felix, what are your thoughts on this? Is this, do you think, I can't ask you to talk for all.
There's a outfit. Let's just go. We're not commenting on looks.
All trans people, but do you think it's a step forward when it comes to trans athletes? Is this what trans athletes want? Their own, their own little tournament, if you like, or is it more about being included into the wider sport? What are your thoughts on this?
So I actually spoke with a lot of trans athletes earlier today. I gathered a lot of people on Twitter and had a conversation with them, because although
Twitter, I bet that was a great conversation.
I have experience in the trans aspect of things, not so much when it comes to athletics.
Yes, at least he's learned from that Andrew Castle fiasco. At least he's learned one thing.
And the overwhelming response is that it's just another form of segregation.
That's a conspiracy theory. The overwhelming response on Twitter from trans people on Twitter is that it's just segregation. Okay?
We saw this originally with when women and men were separated in sports to begin with.
Oh, she's just like, oh really? She's gonna let him rattle this shit off. This is what these people mean, by the way. I bet. The host was actually really good. Let's see. It might be different. She might provide pushback. My overwhelming feeling is that trans people just don't like being disagreed with, but hey, let's see.
It wasn't for the benefit of women, but more the concern that women must be in their own space. They must be separated away from men. And we've already seen, so women are already half the population, and they struggle in sports when it comes to representation, visibility.
Well, they did. I'm assuming he's saying at the time, not now.
Sponsorship. Now, if you take a teeny tiny percentage of people, which is trans people, they're going to suffer so much more. There's no surprise that they've had to do a global call out for athletes, because they're going to struggle to find them and then get them all in one place. There aren't enough trans people to justify segregating them and separating them out into their own category.
That doesn't mean they should be in with the women, though.
And I think that's something that's worth highlighting, because whenever we talk about trans issues, everybody sees it as all these people, what have you. We are, as you say, talking about a teeny tiny number of people.
Yeah, that's the thing. I feel like both the left and the right, if that's how we're putting it, act like trans people are so much bigger of a percentage of people than they are, including this person who will perfectly happily cite how few there are because it supports their argument in some ways. But we're still, the inclusivity stuff that we push is for the benefit of a tiny amount of people when you think about it.
Danny Baker was Britain's first ever transgender boxer, transitioned in his 20s after being born a female, since has fought a handful of semi-professional bouts, but not licensed, according to the WBC. Meanwhile, in 2018, Patricio Manuel became the first transgender male boxer to compete as a professional in US history, defeating Mexican super featherweight Hugo Aguirre. So these have already been happening, but you're saying by forming this tiny little pool, it's another form of segregation. They're not going to get sponsors. They're not going to get recognition. They may not.
Well, probably not. Does that mean they should go in with the women's, though? Like, yeah, it probably would be a pretty shit event that might not get very much traction because, like, people probably just aren't going to want to watch if they don't like trans people. Like, it is what it is. We make these decisions to change parts of ourselves, and then we insist that it's now everyone else's problem.
Even be covered by the media.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to boxing specifically as well, that's already a sport that takes body type and weight and condition into consideration. So why would you marginalize people further by making it more difficult for them to compete? If you're making
Well, an example would be like if a trans woman can hit harder still than a cis woman, then they could cause a lot more damage potentially to a woman than a man.
Making a trans-specific category, you have to take so many more things into consideration. Are you going to be separating trans men and trans women? How do non-binary people come into that?
Non-binary people in sports, like, come on. At a certain point, you're not changing really anything about yourself. And you want to be in what category? Like, why is there any, like, impetus to do anything with non-binary people in this context but ignore them and just focus on their sex?
Are trans men and trans women equal to fight against each other when we know from like hormones that isn't the case?
Yeah, so we know that men and women aren't able to, but he believes that just by taking hormones, that just makes you magically less strong. I'm going to say magically because he said it before. I think today there's a video coming up where I start on him because there was a Pink News article about one of his utter shit debates, like glazing the fuck out of him, and it really annoyed me. So that was a good one, hopefully. But yeah, let's keep going.
So why would you continue to make the sport more difficult for those athletes instead of letting them compete in the body weight that they're in?
Yeah, but with what gender? With which gender, like specifically?
I have to just say, I love the fact that you're a trans activist, and yet you have had because not many people would do this. You've actually said, well, hang on, let me actually talk to those in the sporting world who will be affected.
Yeah, trans people on Twitter in the sporting world. I can't blame her too much. She's older. She doesn't understand Twitter. She doesn't understand how trans people tend to socialize on Twitter. Maybe she doesn't want to push back too much because everyone's mean to the transes, but he's fucking lying his ass off, so...
Because as I said right at the beginning, I think it's important, like people say, black people or trans people, there are lots of different opinions on this. Yeah. So going actually to the people who will be most affected. So let's come to stick with boxing. As you say, do you think height, weight, and category is enough from the point of view of trans people, the few trans people that there are, being involved? Do you think you're saying that those rules are enough to keep people safe and keep people fighting against people with similar weights and similar capabilities?
I do. I think that with all things, especially when it comes to sport, instead of having a blanket over people of separating people, you need to take individual circumstances into consideration, and that's fine. It's okay to do things on a case-by-case basis and have nuance. So some trans male athletes may not be as strong as others, and that's fine. You just have to monitor people and things like hormone levels.
This is like, what is he even saying? Like, what are we getting at here? Like, I'm guessing it's that we need to not segregate sports by sex, which everything he's saying is just recreating sports to sex segregation because men would outstrip women. Like I said, every woman that I've met that's like the same height as me. I feel like I'm way stronger and bigger than. It's rare that I meet a woman that is definitely stronger than me, and it's usually, if it is, because they work out a lot. So
sports already do this. There's no reason as
yeah,
to
they already do this. Like, why are we? What are we saying? Like, monitor everyone's performance. Like, who do they perform against to start with? In that case, and like, I don't know. This is such a complicated way of just like reinventing the wheel.
why a cis man with the same hormone levels as a trans man wouldn't be able to compete with one another. That's just something you monitor. Some cisgender men are not going to be as strong as other cisgender men in their category. That's not.
One thing is though, like, let's monitor it. Like, yeah, sure. What happens if you get a male or a born male athlete against a cis female athlete in boxing, let's say, and the one that's born male actually does significant damage to the one that was born female because of an advantage that they have? And also, I mean, boxing, like, having a bigger frame must be helpful. Like, surely that would skew stuff in favor of trans women because you've got more reach, you've got, you know, you had more muscle mass, you could train harder, all sorts of stuff. But we're always talking around the central issue of the fact that there are people who are born male that want to compete with women, and we never want to get into that. I don't know why, because it hurts people's feelings. Who fucking knows? But these conversations feel worthless because the other side is never going to get over that hurdle. And we either have to show some kind of understanding and show that we're not fucking delusional, or it's this shit. And it's just circling around a point that we never get any closer to actually addressing.
Normal. It's exactly the same for trans people.
Thank you so much for that. And the one thing I have to say that I think that this does is open up a conversation on a different line rather than for and against. We're now starting, please God, to get to the nuances and the differences and what have you. And if
Are we, or did he just say the word nuance a bunch?
if it's all that this does is kickstart that conversation, then good.
And we're not saying like what conversation, like this, she's letting him be super vague. I don't like this. It makes me feel a bit sick watching someone, however innocently, let someone spew their shit. You know, I think this person is genuinely like not good. I don't know what this person is really bringing that's good to these conversations. It's just whitewashing conspiracies, ignoring the actual issue that everyone cares about. Like, do people not just watch this, most of them, and feel completely unsatisfied? Because that's how I feel. I feel like we just haven't really learned anything. Like, I could have told you most of the shit that he said, but there's more to it than that.
But I'm so glad that we've been able to have this conversation.
I'm loving the tiny bit of hair poking out there. Like, you're bald. It's fine. It's fine. It's okay. You don't have to pretend.
So thank you so much again for joining us, Felix. And I know we'll talk a lot more in the future there.
No worries, thank you.
Felix Fern, you're so welcome. Felix Fern, co-founder of the Grassroots Activism.
Well, that was great. One more. It's a bit longer, unfortunately. I was hoping it was the other way around. Recent misinformed headlines claiming that a new NHS consultation states that most trans children are going through a phase. This is going to be... Okay, so people don't like when people push back. This one's saying clown world. Transphobe, your gender is... Okay, whatever. No one cares. No one cares about your fanfics about transphobes. Like, literally no one cares. Shut the fuck up about it. On Twitter, everywhere else, just shut the fuck up. Anyway, this is going to be a really difficult one because how can you tell? Consent is so much more difficult to gauge when it's children. Let's just see what they say.
You know, I put here misleading headline alert because I read there was a headline saying most trans children just going through a phase.
So is it misleading because that's not actually true, which I don't know how we'd verify, Or is it misleading because the thing wasn't actually saying that? Let's see.
Advises NHS. Now, I say misleading headline. It happens all too often because when one actually reads the piece, I think this was in the Times, it's actually about new coming up NHS draft guidelines. And when you read carefully, this is why you should never just go on the headline of a newspaper. Many people do, and you see in the comment section, it's like, oh, knee jerk. But NHS draft guidelines say that doctors should carefully explore all underlying health problems when it comes, this is about children, transgender children, including mental ill health, amid concerns that the NHS is maybe rushing children to irreversible puberty blocking medication. Now, I want you to listen.
Guessing the Tavistock clinic was involved in this. I think I don't know if people were saying that because they were treating children, that's why they got closed. I'm pretty sure it was to do with a lawsuit or something. It's another thing I need to look into. This is all a learning experience, so.
Hear this out because it's beyond the headline. So before we knee jerk, the NHS England document states the clinical management approach should be open to exploring all developmentally appropriate options for children and young people who are experiencing gender incongruence, being mindful that this may be a transient phase, particularly for prepubertal children, and that there will be a range of pathways to support these children and young people and a range of outcomes. A significant portion of children and young people who are concerned about or distressed by issues of gender incongruence experience coexisting mental health, neurodevelopmental, I should be able to say that, and or family or social complexities in their life. So it's about looking at absolute everything. It's not just dismissing children, trans children. It's about...
I hope that I don't dismiss them when I say that consent is hard to gauge and that it's likely that at least some of them are going through a phase. Because what she's saying is correct. You have to look at everything, but that includes what might drive someone, even a kid, to transition. And is it really always going to be gender dysphoria? Is it really always going to be some kind of deep-seated need that they can't explain, that they need to be something that they weren't born as? How much of it is like what they see on the internet and how much of it is like what their friends are doing and stuff like that? Like, it's so much more difficult. And anyone, like, I think I appreciate the way she's putting this in terms of like, you have to look at everything, because it's one of those things that people like to be like, oh, it's very simple. It really is not. And anyone that's saying that, they do not need to be like, fuck, what am I trying to say? Scrutiny needs to be applied, basically.
Seeing, I guess, the bigger picture. I just wanted to talk about this with my next guest, who is a co-founder of the grassroots activism team.
Yeah, they say this every time. It means nothing. Like, anyone could probably start one of these up and use it as their title to give them a bit of clout. I need to look into this trans activism UK. I don't think there's much left to go on Felix Fern. I want to do some kind of piece on most of these people. Like someone like Heather Herbert, I'm not going to bother with, because she's not very good, but she's not like glaringly awful. Someone like this, I think, is a lot more pernicious, a little bit sinister, even, in my opinion.
Trans Activism UK, and Felix Fern, who joins me now. Felix, thank you so much for your time. Is that wise advice, do you think?
There you go. Jim Sterling is in the building.
Or unnecessary? What are your feelings about that?
I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head initially by the fact that, unfortunately, the mainstream media have not so much misinterpreted, but in bad faith given an incorrect interpretation of the NHS guidelines. I think the guidelines are correct. However, the main takeaway is the guidelines aren't perfect. However, the main takeaway is exactly what you've read out. It's not saying that trans children are all going through a phase, which the media has randomly thrown out there to get everyone frightened about the big...
Okay, so it's not saying that they're going through a phase. Fair enough. Like, there's always going to be issues with the media in this regard, because they will put all sorts of shit in the headlines. And I fucking hate the media. I'm not going to lie. I shout on Pink News specifically because they've helped embolden this person in some other bullshit they were spouting on on a different video that I've covered already. But there is a lot of problems. And like, so far, I'm not going to say that I disagree, because I think they're probably correct in this, to be honest.
Scary trans agenda, but rather that they are children.
But then there kind of is a scary trans agenda. Like, how can we, I mean, I understand why people say there isn't, but you know, when shit's this culty, when we've got people who seem to change their gender on a whim and have GoFundMes complaining that they've now got alopecia after they transitioned from female to male and want to get rid of their facial hair now, it's difficult. It's difficult to say that we aren't potentially leading at least some of these kids down a pretty self-destructive road. And, you know, there's nothing you can really say, because, I mean, I don't know if this person's happy or not. I could wager a guess based on these appearances and based on their, like, Twitter energy and stuff, but I don't know. If my kid was constantly transitioning in and out of things and just saying that's just normal, like, that would concern the fuck out of me. That's all I'm saying.
Children, there is always a chance that it could be a transient phase. They may not be going through a normal sort of cookie cutter transition, and that's fine, and it's normal, and it's not anything scary.
Well, that really depends on how it's going, right?
And all children should be supported to work that out for themselves with the help of both a supportive family and professionals.
I mentioned this before, and I don't want to go into who they are, but there's
they. It's like when you hear like Muse songs and it's like, they will not, whatever, you know, it's like constantly talking about they. It's like saying the man or something. It's a bit cringe.
Trans, so it's a big issue. There's trans and transgender, but let's talk about just you know, the whole. We're talking about the whole area. You can be.
Yeah, not that it's become overcomplicated or anything, no. Jesus Christ.
Be trans without wanting to be transgender. There's a whole debate, and I don't think the vast majority of people know diddly squat about the difference. Or if you have a deeply distressed child, and
there's a point, like, why has no one ever thought about maybe simplifying this shit? Apart from me, I guess. I don't know. If I'm talking to like normies or like gender crits in particular, I'll use the terms trans woman and woman, you know? So I'm not erasing anyone's identity. And I'm not saying, I say identity, is it? I don't know. And I'm not calling trans women men, because I don't think trans women are the same as men. And I don't think trans women are the same as women. So it makes sense to, again, maybe I'm too obsessed with meeting people halfway, and maybe I need to stop being such, because it feels like it's never really reciprocated. But that's something I'm working out. I've yet to really have that many conversations, so it's just something that I'm gonna have to assess as I go.
You'll have to look at the suicide figures, you know, for children who are deeply distressed for whatever reasons around incongruence and sexuality.
Yeah, that's kind of terrifying, because, like, where do they, depending on where it comes from, I need to think about that more, but you can kind of see, right? You can kind of see why a parent would find out about, like, their kid becoming trans and knowing a bit about, like, the suicide rate and all that shit, and being, like, scared shitless. I can empathize with that position, personally.
And I read there's somebody called Pinkman Ray who I follow on social media, who made the really pertinent point that, yes, sometimes if children transition or people transition, they may transition back.
Which is not reversible, by the way, and which can affect your health in many, many ways. If you're a female to male, back to female again, it ruins your voice. You might not like what you sound like anymore. There's a lot to consider. I don't know if she's gonna, because this person doesn't seem to take transition or detransition very seriously, but that's just the impression I'm getting. I can't really speak to them personally, but I don't know if she's gonna caveat it that way.
It's a much smaller number. However,
it's a much smaller number. We need to, like, seriously fix the way that we talk about detransitioners, honestly. It's bizarre. that like they seem to get the same thing that trans people do, but like tenfold, of where you'll get all the clout and all the love in the world as long as you say the right things. But if you're not saying the right things, everyone fucking hates you. That's what it comes across as to me.
However, there are more suicides amongst children who are just left to wallow than there's virtually no suicides about people who change back.
Yeah,
Jeez. I don't like the way they're talking about detransition here. Let's see what Felix says, though.
completely agree. Like, looking at statistics, we know that the chances of detransition are incredibly slim. Not only are they incredibly
Again, wait, let me go back one sec.
slim. Yeah, I completely agree. Like, looking at statistics, we know that the chances of detransition are incredibly slim.
Like, what statistics and how are we defining like detransitioners? Like, there's probably, yeah, I don't know. I don't trust this person on anything at this point.
Not only are they incredibly slim, but they're normally due to a lack of support. The chances of it happening due to regret are normally.
Sometimes it's like lack of support from in the community, which is actually quite damning on the community, because the trans communities fucking suck, online at least. I don't know what they're like IRL. The only one that I knew about IRL where I live that isn't here anymore seemed exactly like the online ones. So I steered clear, I steered clear pretty quickly and permanently.
Like, so if say you have 1% of transitioners, the amount of those doing it, like detransitioning rather to forget, is halved. Most people are doing it for financial reasons or because they feel pressured
I'm suspicious about this. I'm suspicious about all of this.
by their family, their friends, the people around them. So they're far more likely to end up with worse mental health. And the same goes for children. There was a very recent study in the Netherlands of 720 under 18s. And of all of those, less than 2% have expressed a desire to stop being on hormone blockers.
After how long? What would that be now? This was November 2022. I actually put on a second video before the first one, but they're not the same conversation anyway. But like, yeah, I'd need to see that, like, very kindly. Once again, no sources.
And then when you look at adults, the statistics are incredibly similar. It's, I think for the US, it's something like 8% of people may consider detransition, or they consider not being happy, but they may not actually detransition. The vast majority of people are happier when they're being given support. That's not only professional, but also amongst their families as well.
Well, yeah, obviously.
Like, looking at transgender children at the moment and the trans community as a whole, something that is far scarier and more worrying for people is not whether or not they may go through transition or what elements of transition will make them happy. It's headlines like this in the mainstream media that tell them that there's this big terrifying agenda that's going to make their lives more difficult, or that doctors aren't necessarily acting in good faith. And that's going to weigh on people's minds far more than the actual reality of being trans.
I don't know about that. Like, maybe I just transitioned at a different time. I didn't really notice the media much because I just don't think that way. It's just not how I approach things. Like, for me, it was much more like, will I pass? Will I look any good? Will I sound any good? Apparently not, but I am what I am, you know.
And I've touched upon having a trans kid, so you know, and when you have a loved one going through anything like this, you want as much support. Here's a question. Let me just
support, not like coddling. And I think this person comes across quite coddling. I don't know how much they've been coddled by other people, but coddling certainly. And that their approach seems very childish, which unfortunately is another recurring thing. Like, you know, the questions about the changing rooms earlier was very childish, and it was very idealistic. Well, just change it to this. It's like, well, no, it's not that simple. Like, you have to make a case for that kind of thing if you're going to tell people to change, you know, their changing room in the gym that they own. That costs money. You can't just say, well, do this.
throw it out there because loads of people are going to saying it. Why do you think it's so, the people who say, oh, it wasn't like that in my day, all of this trans, this, that, and the other, it's just a fashion. Why are so many people wanting to be transgender now? Why do you think that it's just more visible thanks to social media and what have you? Or do you think that the more we talk about it, the more it comes to be the norm?
I think that despite...
It's probably a bit of both. The visibility it's not only going to make more people tap into potential gender dysphoria they have, but it's also going to make it more likely to be trendy. So really it depends on the person, and a good answer would be to acknowledge both as possibilities and that it varies from person to person. And hey, some people don't transition for the right reasons. That's just how it is. It's how it's always been. It's how it's always gonna be. You can name any freak thing that a person could do, and someone's probably done it. Let's be real.
Despite scary headlines like this, it is
like scary headlines. Like, I don't know about this, man.
It's 100% a sign that no matter how bad things may look in the mainstream media, things are actually getting better.
Our rights are definitely not getting better now.
We didn't see as many gay people. We didn't see as many bisexual people. It's all people suggesting that it is a phase or that people are suddenly appearing in huge numbers is just mindless rehash.
Wait, suddenly appearing in huge numbers. So what is this person's explanation for the fact that trans men have absolutely shot past trans women in terms of their percentage in the overall trans community? It used to be that you'd get more trans women than trans men, and now trans men are by far the majority. That doesn't happen naturally. That can't be because there's more visibility. I don't accept that. Like, women are much more social creatures. Like, the chance for social contagion is higher. There has been trends around this kind of stuff on things like TikTok, and in like leftist groups, it's often you'd find you'd get treated better if you're trans versus if you're cis, assuming you're saying the right things.
Homophobia and fear-mongering.
Homophobia. We're not even talking about homophobia, but it's intersectionality, so I guess we have to crowbar all the other shit in there, I guess.
We've always been here, and seeing more of us is meant to be a good sign. It's not a scary sign that we're suddenly...
A good sign of what? That not many people are having kids anymore? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Taking over with this big scary conspiracy. It's a wonderful sign.
Taking over with this big scary conspiracy. Like, I don't know, man. Like, I need to find something else to watch for a bit. Like, I'm going to stop after this because I'm tired, but...
That the world is becoming safer for us to be here and for people to actually see us instead of us hiding away in the shadows.
If trans people hid away in the shadows, like, what? I don't know. I'm at the point where everything they say, I'm just like, I don't know about that, man. I can't even think straight anymore. That's where it gets to, because these people, there's so much like doublespeak, and there's so much what seems to me like clear manipulation that other people aren't necessarily picking up on or are trying to work around. I don't know.
When you look at the history, I didn't realize, and I've learned through my kid, how many famous people going back centuries would have been labeled trans or transgender. I mean, really, loads and loads of people don't even know about. It's another part of history that we don't learn about.
Yeah, I mean, it's always been a thing. I'm not going to contest that. I think that the visibility has led to a lot of the stranger stuff that's been going on recently. Like, I think that's definitely a part of it.
And it's because it's invisible, we think it didn't exist.
Yeah, absolutely. We didn't have the same kind of terminology. So
it's definitely not invisible anymore, fucking hell.
It's so often you'll be reading about, especially like literary famous people, the amount of times you will look into it and suddenly see this woman lived as a man throughout her life and decided to marry a woman, and she dressed as a man and she lived as a man. It's like, that's a trans person. They've always been there. They just didn't.
Well, maybe you can't really put that on someone. I mean, it's a different time. It's a different, women wouldn't have had the same opportunities. So like, they might still be women, but be living a certain way. I don't know. Queering historical figures is not my shit. Like, what was it? That one about Kurt Cobain being trans? Like, why? Just don't. But I mean, it makes a bit more sense if they're living like a man. I see at least why you'd do it in that sense. But I don't. Is it really as important as we act like it is? I don't know.
Didn't have the same kind of terminology or support that we have now. We've been around this whole
Has the terminology helped or harmed though?
time. I was literally writing an article about the intersection between queerness and horror recently, because Halloween, and
Wow, that sounds fascinating.
reading about how Mary Shelley, who we now know was bisexual, had a transgender male friend, and just all this stuff has just been kind of hidden away in history. We've always been here. It's just nice now that we can be recognized for who we are.
And it's nice now. I mean, my personal thoughts are that they're bringing mental health services and the whole not dealing with anybody. I don't think it's just a trans or a transgender issue. I think anybody with any issue, you need a 360-degree look at what's going on in their life. It's treating the person rather than the quote unquote.
So long as we're saying what they want you to say, there's so much confirmation bias that you risk through the way that we've been talking about trans stuff, in my opinion.
Condition.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, from my point of view, I am transgender. I also have depression and I also have autism. And sometimes those
You couldn't tell.
things can intersect. I know
I can make that joke, by the way.
Personally, for me, that they're not compatible with one another. But if you are looking at an individual and they're struggling in one area, you should look at everything, because some things may be headbutting with something else. We should.
Yeah, but does that include wondering whether someone's really trans, or if they're just trying to be trendy, or if they're displacing something else onto being trans? Like, you see, I don't trust anything this person says, and I'm losing any ability to be objective, which is why I need to stop in a sec. But we're almost done.
Should focus far less on identity politics and just ensuring that people are getting the right kind of treatment that they should.
But these people are fucking constantly pushing identity politics. That's what intersectionality practically is, from what I can tell. Again, it's something I need to look more into. It's something I don't know too much beyond surface level, because reading about intersectionality is painful for me. But it's something really grosses me out about this that's extremely difficult to explain to people. So it very much probably just looks like I'm being hypercritical and irrational. I don't know. Let's just finish this, please. Please, God.
What have
whatever.
I done?
I don't want to watch Demon Mama.
They are, because you're absolutely right. Mental health is a far bigger crisis at the moment than being trans.
Oh, yeah.
Wow. What with the 5-year waits and stuff, there kind of is a crisis around being trans. I don't know. I do agree, because a lot more people have mental health issues, but I just hate the way this person words everything. I'm sorry. I can't. I'm so glad that I don't think we've got much else to look at when it comes to this person, because I've lost the ability to talk about them, I think.
Yes. Thank you so much, Felix, for
that. All right, well, that was my extremely good faith latest section on Felix Fan. I'm gonna go, I don't know, do whatever.